I recently made a video explaining the lore and full life of all 9 Templar targets from the original Assassin's Creed. Today we'll be moving on to the Templars from the Italian Renaissance. Before I begin, almost 97% of those who view my videos are unsubscribed, so if at any point you enjoyed the video or want to stay up to date with my content, then please consider subscribing to the channel as it does help out tremendously. Anyway, with that said, let us begin with the first Templar target. Uberto Alberti, who was born in 1416, spent most of his life in Florence and earned a reputation as a highly respected lawyer. Remarkably, despite being entirely self-taught, he won the majority of his cases. However, his career took a personal turn when the Medici Bank forced his family from their home, planting in him a deep resentment and a desire for revenge against the Medici. It was this bitterness that eventually drew him to the Templars, who promised him the opportunity to exact his revenge in exchange for his loyalty. After being elected to the Signoria, Uberto secretly allied with them, while outwardly strengthening his ties with the Medici, earning the trust of Lorenzo and presenting himself as a close confidant to Giovanni Auditore. During this period, Uberto advised both Lorenzo and Giovanni on political matters, and even took part in interrogating one of Rodrigo Borgia's agents concerning the planned assassination of Galeazzo Maria Sforza. When Giovanni intercepted a suspicious letter in Venice, Uberto was tasked with decoding it. Instead, after Antonio Maffei completed the deciphering, he arranged for a forged copy of the undeciphered letter to be delivered to Giovanni, sending him on a fruitless trail to Rome in pursuit of the supposed conspirators. Following Giovanni's near successful attempt to apprehend Rodrigo Borgia in Rome, Uberto attended a secret meeting with the Spaniard and other Templar leaders, where it was decided that Giovanni would need to be eliminated for their schemes to succeed. Sometime after, back in Florence, Ezio Auditore came across Uberto in Giovanni's study, where he and his father were discussing a matter of urgency. Giovanni quickly dismissed Ezio before he could grasp what was being spoken about. Unfortunately, soon after this meeting, Uberto issued warrants for the arrests of Giovanni along with Federico, Patricio and Ezio himself, accusing them of treason. By chance, however, Ezio was doing errands for his father when the guards arrived. Later, Ezio secretly visited Giovanni in prison, where his father entrusted him with the letter for Uberto, which contained proof of a plot against the Medici that could clear their family's name. Upon receiving the letter, Uberto invited Ezio to remain at his home, likely intending to have him killed, but Ezio declined. When the day of the execution came in the Piazza della Signoria, Giovanni furiously reminded Uberto of the evidence Ezio had delivered, which proved their innocence. Uberto, however, feigned ignorance, denying any knowledge of the document before ordering the execution. As the sentence was carried out, Giovanni shouted that Uberto and his Templar allies would one day pay for their betrayal, moments before he and his sons were hanged. Once Ezio's training was complete, Paola instructed her courtesans to uncover Uberto's whereabouts. Their search revealed that he would be attending an art exhibition by Andrea del Verrocchio at the cloister of Santa Croce. As Ezio moved towards his target, Uberto was speaking with Lorenzo de' Medici, belittling him whilst boasting about the Auditore executions. Later, among other nobles, Uberto continued to revel in his cruelty, praising his own actions and mocking Ezio's family. At that moment, Ezio struck. Though Uberto noticed him at the last instant, he was too stunned to summon help. Ezio attacked swiftly, driving his hidden blade into Uberto's chest multiple times. As he lay dying, Uberto tried to excuse his betrayal as an act of love for his own family, but Ezio coldly rejected his words, leaving him to his fate. And so Uberto Alberti died on the 31st of December 1476 at the age of 60. Vieri de Pazzi was born sometime in 1459 and was the youngest member of Florence's wealthy Pazzi family. He was the son of Francesco de Pazzi, great-nephew of Jacapo de Pazzi, and brother to Viola de Pazzi, who is briefly referenced to early in the game. Little is recorded about his early years, but sometime in 1476 he made a terrible move. One evening he cornered Cristina Vespucci, a woman he desired, at her home in Florence. Cristina rejected his advances, but Vieri, however, pressed on, declaring that he had grown impatient waiting to sleep with her. Before he could act, Ezio Auditore, who had been watching from nearby, intervened. A heated exchange quickly turned into a fistfight, which Ezio won, and so Vieri fled but swore revenge, threatening that Ezio's entire family would pay for the interference. Later that same year, Vieri's father Francesco was arrested after Giovanni uncovered damning evidence against him. This intensified the feud between the Pazzis and the Auditores, tensions that eventually erupted into a violent street fight between the two young members of each family. In January of 1477, Vieri confronted Ezio in the Tuscan countryside as Ezio attempted to flee Florence with his mother and sister. Vieri ordered his soldiers to kill the fleeing Auditores, but Ezio managed to hold them off just long enough for Mario and his mercenaries to arrive. With their support, Ezio turned the tide of the skirmish, forcing Vieri to retreat from the area. The clash near Monteregione only intensified the conflict. Over the next 18 months, Vieri launched repeated assaults on the town, determined to break its defences. Finally, in April 1478, Ezio met Mario and his mercenaries near San Gimignano, where his uncle revealed their plan to eliminate Vieri once and for all, and end his grip over the city. Later that same evening, Vieri joined his father Francesco, his great-uncle Jacapo, and the Templar Grand Master Rodrigo Borgia. The gathering centred on their conspiracy to overthrow the Medici. Tasks were assigned to each member, with Vieri ordered to remain in San Gimignano to oversee the city's mercenaries. However, he expressed concern about Mario Auditore. Rodrigo dismissed his worries, assuring him that the Auditores would be dealt with in due time. The conspirators ended the meeting by swearing the Templar oath together, after which Francesco, Jacopo, and Rodrigo departed, leaving Vieri behind. Moments later, Mario and his mercenaries launched a surprise attack on the city. As the fighting erupted, Vieri retreated to the battlements to command his men. Unbeknownst to him though, Ezio had secretly observed the meeting and now followed, cutting down Vieri's guards before confronting him directly. The two clashed in a duel, but Ezio eventually bested his rival and drove his hidden blade into Vieri's chest. Grabbing the dying noble by the shirt, Ezio demanded answers, desperate to know the true purpose of the Templar conspiracy and whether his father's death was tied to it. Vieri, however, refused to yield, using his final breaths to sneer at Ezio and mock him for expecting any kind of confession. With that, he collapsed and died at the age of only 19, on the 21st of April 1478. But in 1511, 33 years after Vieri's death, an older Ezio attended a banquet in Constantinople where he performed a song mocking his old rival.
Vieri, oh Vieri, yes, he of Pazzi fame, was just as mad as his old man, and ended just the same.
Francesco grew up in Florence as a noble during a time when the city was enthralled by the rising power of the Medici family. From a young age, he was taught to scorn the middle class and those who sought to rise above their station, ambitions that the Medici embodied. As he matured, Francesco watched with bitterness as the Medici bank steadily overshadowed his own, while his family's centuries-old influence within the Florentine government dwindled. The collapse of his financial power and the erosion of his political standing fueled a deep resentment toward the Medici in particular. It was during this period that Rodrigo Borgia approached Francesco with a proposition that promised mutual benefit: the elimination of the Medici. Francesco readily agreed, setting into motion the beginnings of conspiracy against them. However, in December 1476, he was arrested by the assassin Giovanni Auditore, who accused him of involvement in the murder of Galeazzo Maria Sforza, the Duke of Milan. Giovanni prepared to bring evidence against him before the courts, but was betrayed by Uberto Alberti. With Giovanni executed and the evidence destroyed, the charges against Francesco collapsed and he walked free. In 1478, Francesco gathered with his fellow Templar conspirators in San Gimignano. His role was to organise the Templar forces within Florence and send word when the time came to strike. Later that year, he met with the group again, this time in the catacombs beneath Santa Maria Novella, where they finalised their scheme to overthrow the Medici and seize control of the city. The plot came to a head during High Mass the next morning at the Duomo. Francesco and his allies launched their assault, charging at the Medici brothers. Francesco himself struck Giuliano, stabbing him repeatedly until he was dead. The attempt on Lorenzo, however, failed, and Ezio managed to get him away safely. Not long after, Ezio discovered that Francesco was leading a battalion around the back of the Palazzo della Signoria. Once there, he found Francesco on the prison ramparts, where the Templar mocked him before ordering his men to attack. Ezio cut his way through the soldiers and climbed onto the rooftops of the palazzo, battling his way to Francesco's position. When confronted, Francesco cursed the assassin and leapt from the ramparts into a hay cart, forcing Ezio to give chase through the streets of Florence. The pursuit ended when Ezio finally caught him and delivered the fatal blow. As he lay dying, Francesco admitted only that the conspiracy had failed and that everything was lost. His body was later displayed by Medici supporters, hung from the top of the palazzo as a warning. Francesco met his end on April 26th, 1478, at the age of 34. Antonio Maffei was born in Volterra, Tuscany in 1450. In 1472, he witnessed his hometown sacked by Florentine mercenaries and blamed Lorenzo de' Medici for the devastation. Seeking vengeance, he joined the Templar Order. In 1476, when Giovanni Auditore intercepted an encrypted letter, Uberto recognised the seal of the Barbarigo family. Knowing that the translation would take hours, he entrusted the task to Father Maffei. Later that night, Maffei presented the translated letter to Uberto, who praised his skill and instructed him to fetch Giovanni. Before leaving, Antonio swore a vow of silence, pledging not to reveal the letter's contents. When Giovanni arrived, he observed Maffei creating a duplicate of the letter. Uberto explained that they had been unable to decode it and handed the copy to Giovanni to deliver it to Rome, its intended destination. Later that same year, after Giovanni's failed attempt to capture Grandmaster Rodrigo Borgia, he returned home to Florence, wounded and exhausted. While his wife Maria tended to his injuries, Father Maffei arrived with armed guards, demanding entry to Auditore's residence and custody of Giovanni. Giovanni, however, instructed his eldest son, Federico, to delay Antonio, allowing him to escape through a hidden passage. When Antonio eventually gained entry and discovered Giovanni had fled, he grew frustrated and left the house. On April 25, 1478, Antonio Maffei met with his fellow Templar conspirators in the catacombs beneath Santa Maria Novella, though he remained silent during the discussion. He did not object to any of the plans proposed by the others, and so when the day of the assassination arrived, Antonio attempted to stab Lorenzo, but then briefly struggled with him. As Lorenzo rose and drew his sword, Antonio was forced to retreat. After the Templars' failure in Florence, Antonio fled to San Gimignano in Tuscany, taking refuge atop one of the city's towering spires. From there, he loudly recited biblical passages while archers patrolled the tower, ready to defend him. Ezio, having learned of Antonio's location from one of his uncle's mercenaries, began his ascent of the towering structure. Upon reaching the top, he silently dispatched the patrolling archers before climbing a ladder to confront Antonio directly. The two engaged in a fierce duel, but despite Antonio's frenzied attacks and his repeated cries of divine protection, he was no match for Ezio. The assassin ultimately threw the mad monk from the tower, ending his life. As he fell, Antonio cursed Ezio, calling him a demon, before dying in 1478 at the age of 28. Francesco Salviati was a man consumed by ambition, utterly convinced that he was destined to become the next Archbishop of Florence. His aspirations, however, were shattered when Lorenzo stood in his way. Publicly denied the position he so desperately sought, Francesco's ambition curdled into hatred, and from that moment onward, he vowed to exact his revenge against the Medici family. The Templars quickly recognised his value, seeing in Francesco both an eager conspirator and a man whose influence within the church could greatly advance their cause. Wealth was already on Francesco's side, thanks to his ties to Pope Sixtus IV, and he used his resources to purchase a Tuscan villa in 1475. Over the following years, he poured money into extensive renovations, reshaping the villa in the elegant Tuscan style. Outwardly, it was the estate of a rising churchman preparing for his inevitable ascension, but in reality, it became the place where Francesco nurtured his resentment and quietly plotted the downfall of the Medici alongside his allies in the Pazzi family. The chance for revenge finally came with the infamous Pazzi conspiracy. While Francesco's co-conspirators orchestrated the attempted assassination of Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano within Florence, Francesco himself led his men into the city to carry out a coordinated assault. When the conspiracy unraveled, many fled in panic. Francesco, realising his life was now forfeit, abandoned his allies and escaped into the Italian countryside. In desperation, he traded clothes with a farmer, hoping to vanish into obscurity, but his deceit had deadly consequences. The farmer was mistaken for the fugitive and hung in his place. Meanwhile, Francesco retreated to his villa. There in the quiet hills of Tuscany, he tried to shield himself from the inevitable. He barricaded the villa, surrounding himself with guards. Francesco's worst fear came to life when the assassin finally tracked him to his villa. Despite the barricades and the guards he had placed around the estate, Ezio slipped past the defences, cutting down resistance as he moved deeper into the villa. Once inside, he opened the gates and allowed the mercenaries under the command of his uncle Mario to pour into the villa. The quiet hills of Tuscany were suddenly filled with the clash of steel and the shouts of men as battle erupted between Francesco's loyal guards and the forces allied with the assassins. Within the chaos, Ezio confronted Francesco himself. The two exchanged words as much as they exchanged blows. Francesco, once a man of ambition and confidence, now lashed out with anger and desperation, railing against the Medici and cursing Ezio for standing in his way. But Ezio pressed forward until the man of God was overwhelmed. With his defeat inevitable, Francesco collapsed, gravely wounded. On April 12, 1479, at the age of just 36, Francesco Salviati's life came to an end. Bernardo di Bandino Baroncelli was born in 1453, raised in an environment steeped in bitterness toward the Medici family. His cousins had been exiled by them, and this injustice took root in Bernardo's heart, shaping him from a young age into a man consumed by resentment. That hatred eventually found purpose when he entered the service of the Pazzi family, where he became a banker and through his employer Jacapo de Pazzi, was drawn into the ranks of the Templar Order. By 1478, the Pazzi conspiracy was in motion, and the secret meeting beneath the Santa Maria Novella, Bernardo pledged his loyalty to the cause. He offered not only weapons, but also his own blade for the murder of Lorenzo. On the day of the assassination attempt, Bernardo was among the first to act. As the chaos erupted, he lunged forward, striking Giuliano with a swift stab. His attack was driven not by strategy or duty, but by the deeply ingrained hatred that had fueled him since childhood. Though Giuliano would be brutally finished off by Francesco, Bernardo's role as one of the opening aggressors sealed his place in the bloody act. Yet when the attempt on Lorenzo failed and the conspiracy unravelled, Bernardo's courage faltered. Instead of standing with his co-conspirators, he fled the scene, abandoning them to their fates. After fleeing to Constantinople, he was captured there and was being transported back to Florence for punishment. But fortune favoured him. He managed to escape his captors and slipped back into Italy. In 1479, word reached Ezio that Bernardo had escaped justice and was hiding in San Gimignano. Local mercenaries had tried to flush him out, but Bernardo proved elusive. Ezio, however, had more than steel at his disposal. He had the gift of eagle vision. Scanning the crowded markets, he was able to single out the fugitive. Ezio moved swiftly, striking before Bernardo's paranoia could save him. On May 3rd, 1479, Bernardo Baroncelli was killed at just 26 years old. Stefano was born in 1418 in the small town of Bagnone. At some point in his life, he chose the path of the church and became a monk, but beneath the robes of faith lay a far darker allegiance. Eventually, Stefano pledged himself to the Templar Order and was trained in Rome, not in scripture or devotion, but in cruelty. His skill as a torturer became his defining role. His intellect and discipline made him useful beyond the dungeon as well, and he served as a secretary to Jacapo de Pazzi, one of the leading figures in the infamous conspiracy against the Medici. When the Templars convened in the secrecy beneath Santa Maria Novella, Stefano was among those who gave their blessings to the plan. To the Templars, Florence represented a jewel of power, and with Lorenzo removed, their influence could spread unchecked. Stefano, devout not to God but to the cause of the order, lent his voice and his blade to their scheme. On the fateful day of the assassination attempt, Stefano struck quickly and viciously. As Lorenzo turned around, Stefano rushed forward and slashed across his back. But before he could finish the job, Lorenzo's allies came to his defence. Realising the attempt had failed, Stefano fled the scene, vanishing into the chaos while others of the conspiracy met their bloody ends. Though the plot unravelled, Stefano remained steadfast in his loyalty to the Templars. He slipped away into the Tuscan countryside, seeking safety within the walls of the monastery, at the Monte Oliveto Maggiore. There he was hidden among the holy men, where he believed he could escape the eyes of the assassins. Yet even in the company of monks, his nature betrayed him. Rather than preach faith, he spread doubt, speaking of the non-existence of God and trying to convince others to abandon their belief. It was within this monastery that Ezio tracked him down. To find him, Ezio blended with the monks, walking silently among them until he could single out the conspirator. Stefano's disguise, so similar to the robes of those around him, forced Ezio to rely on his eagle vision, revealing the Templar hidden in plain sight. Ezio found him mid-conversation, fervently proclaiming his beliefs to another priest. In 1479, Ezio struck with his hidden blade, ending Stefano's life at the age of 61. In 1478, Jacapo de Pazzi, patriarch of the Pazzi family and a prominent member of the Templar Order, convened with his conspirators in San Gimignano. Together, they outlined their ambitious plan to overthrow the Medici's rule in Florence. Jacopo was an experienced schemer with vast wealth and political connections, and so he was entrusted with the crucial role of quelling the Florentine populace once the deed was done. His task was to pacify the people and ensure the transition of power went smoothly after the Medici were eliminated. Later at the secret meeting, Jacopo raised his voice in caution. He expressed genuine concern about underestimating their enemies, wary of the influence that Lorenzo commanded. The following morning, the plan was put into action. As Francesco and the other conspirators launched their brutal attack on the Medici brothers, Jacopo rallied the Pazzi loyalists in front of the Palazzo della Signoria. Standing before the crowd, he cried out for liberty, urging Florentines to rise against Medici tyranny. Yet his grand display of authority and defiance was short-lived. To his horror, the mutilated body of Francesco was hurled over the palazzo's facade. Panic gripped Jacopo. What was meant to be a moment of victory had instead descended into humiliation and disaster. Without hesitation, he fled Florence, seeking refuge within the fortified walls of San Gimignano. There, Jacopo used his wealth and resources to disappear into the city, surrounding himself with guards and fortifications. His influence allowed him to remain hidden, but unlike him, his fellow conspirators lacked such means. One by one, they were hunted down by Ezio. Through these assassinations, Ezio uncovered intelligence pointing to yet another Templar meeting, one that Jacopo himself would attend. In 1480, Ezio finally closed in on his quarry. tracking Jacopo to a church within San Gimignano. The assassin shadowed him from the rooftops as he made his way to an ancient Roman theatre. There Jacopo joined Rodrigo Borgia and Emilio Barbarigo, a powerful Venetian merchant and Templar ally. Jacopo was visibly uneasy and attempted to explain away the disaster in Florence. He shifted the blame onto Francesco, condemning him as reckless and impulsive, whilst also chastising Emilio for supplying inferior weapons that had hindered their plans. His words, however, struck no chord of sympathy. In a sudden act of brutal judgment, he drove a stiletto into Jacopo's stomach. Staggering, he turned to Emilio, pleading desperately for mercy, but mercy was not to be found. Emilio, unmoved by his cries, thrust his blade into Jacopo a second time and shoved him to the ground. Rodrigo was not yet satisfied and brandished his weapon once more to pierce Jacopo's neck with a final decisive strike. As life drained from him, Jacapo de Pazzi collapsed, abandoned and betrayed by those he had served so loyally. Rodrigo was unfazed and turned his attention to Ezio, whom he and Emilio had already suspected of lurking nearby. He ordered his guards to find the assassin and kill him before departing with his Venetian ally. Ezio, however, fought his way through the ambush, vanquishing the men sent to silence him. When the dust settled, he approached the mortally wounded Jacopo. In a final act of mercy, Ezio ended his suffering with the hidden blade. Jacapo de Pazzi, once a wealthy nobleman and proud Templar, died on January 3rd, 1480, at the age of 59. Emilio Barbarigo rose to prominence in Venice through the strength of his influential family and the ruthless cunning of his own ambition. With the Barbarigo name behind him, he seized control of the city's mercantile power by systematically edging out his rivals, lobbying the Venetian government, and bending the city's laws to his will. Using his large wealth, Emilio went a step further. He financed the entire Venetian police force. This clever maneuver granted him sweeping influence, shielding his finances from taxation whilst ensuring the streets were kept free of crime, except when that crime served his own purposes. Any merchant who dared oppose him or failed to pay their rent on time quickly found their livelihood destroyed, their stands smashed beneath the boots of his soldiers. His resources and authority did not go unnoticed by the Templar Order. Emilio became a vital cog in their operations, responsible for supplying weapons to their conspirators in Florence and beyond. His wealth and influence allowed him to maintain a significant role in Templar affairs, and he established his residence in the imposing Palazzo della Seta, a fortress-like palace in San Polo. Surrounded by tall iron fences, vigilant archers, and brutish guards, the palazzo stood as both a symbol of Emilio's power and a statement of defiance to anyone who might think to challenge it. In 1480, Emilio attended a gathering in a ruined Roman theatre in Tuscany. The meeting had been intended for the Pazzi conspirators, though only Jacapo de Pazzi managed to appear. This encounter solidified Emilio's standing within the order. By 1481, Emilio's dominion over San Polo was absolute. Merchants lived in constant fear of his guards, who patrolled the streets and enforced his will. The Venetian Thieves Guild, headquartered in San Polo itself and led by the charismatic Antonio, grew restless under Emilio's suffocating rule. When Ezio arrived in Venice seeking allies against the Templars, Antonio and his thieves joined forces with him. For years they prepared in the shadows, chipping away at Emilio's stranglehold on the city. Finally, on September 11th, 1485, after 4 long years of quiet resistance, the thieves judged the time was right to strike. Ezio scaled the rooftops of the Palazzo della Seta, watching his target closely as Emilio conducted his affairs within the courtyard below. That evening, Ezio witnessed Emilio meet with fellow Templar Carlo Grimaldi, a powerful member of Venice's Council of Ten. Their conversation revealed troubling news. Carlo warned Emilio that an assassin hunted him and urged him to remain cautious. He also spoke of a forthcoming Templar meeting, scheduled at the Santo Stefano in 3 days' time, by Rodrigo Borgia himself. Carlo, ever pragmatic, advised Emilio to abandon his fortress at San Polo and move somewhere less conspicuous, where the assassin's reach would not be so keenly felt. But Emilio, arrogant and entrenched, refused to abandon the power he had built. After Carlo departed, he ordered his men to prepare his boat and begin loading it with his possessions, intending only to strengthen his hold, not flee from it. Yet before his escape could be arranged, Ezio drove his hidden blade into Emilio, ending his reign of oppression in an instant. Emilio Barbarigo died on September 11, 1485, at the age of 63. Carlo Grimaldi had always been a political animal, driven from childhood by an insatiable hunger for influence. For him, true power was not found in the battlefield, but in the council chamber, in the ability to bend laws and men to his will. Carlo was fortunate to enjoy the acquaintance of Giovanni Mocenigo, the Doge of Venice, and he laboured tirelessly to strengthen that bond. He carefully cultivated trust, presenting himself as both loyal and indispensable. But ambition required more than loyalty. it required ruthless action. That opportunity arrived when Carlo discovered a secret involving Ignazio Contarini, a respected Venetian politician. Ignazio's daughter had fallen in love with the son of a servant, a scandalous match that defied her father's wishes. Seizing upon this, Carlo crafted a deception. He convinced the young couple that escape was possible, urging them to flee by boat under the cover of night. But when the lovers arrived at the appointed place, freedom was not waiting for them. Carlo stood there with armed men, and Ignazio himself. The servant's son was slaughtered on the spot, and the terrified daughter was dragged back into her father's grasp. The betrayal was cold, calculated, and effective. Ignazio was grateful that his honour had been preserved, and so he praised Carlo lavishly to the Doge. Giovanni Mocenigo rewarded Carlo with a coveted seat on the Council of Ten. Years later, in 1485, Carlo's ambition drew him deeper into the orbit of the Templar Order. Shortly before Emilio Barbarigo's assassination, Carlo had met with him, unaware of how close Ezio was. Soon after, he joined a gathering in the streets of Venice with Marco Barbarigo, Silvio Barbarigo, Dante Moreau, and Rodrigo Borgia. Together, they conspired to eliminate the sitting Doge, paving the way for one of their own to ascend and secure Venice fully for the Templars. Given the task to sway Giovanni Mocenigo to their cause, Carlo tried to persuade the Doge with pleas, warnings, and carefully crafted false concern. But Mocenigo, an experienced statesman, would not bend to manipulation. His refusal sealed his fate. Carlo arranged one final meeting at the Palazzo Ducale, cloaking his intent beneath the guise of a simple game of chess. Carlo poured wine laced with cantarella, a potent poison. He encouraged the Doge to drink. A sudden noise from the roof threatened to unravel the scheme, but Carlo dismissed it with a clever lie, assuring Mocenigo it was nothing more than children with firecrackers. After this, the Doge drank deeply, and the poison began to work almost immediately. It was at this moment that Ezio burst into the chamber, swooping through the window in Leonardo da Vinci's flying machine. He accused Carlo of treachery, but the assassin was too late. The Doge had already succumbed to the poison. Racked with pain, Mocenigo collapsed, while Carlo fled the chamber, shouting that it was Ezio who had murdered the Doge. The lie was convincing enough to stir chaos, but Ezio pursued him relentlessly through the halls of the palazzo. With the hidden blade, Ezio silenced the traitor once and for all. Carlo Grimaldi died on September 14th, 1485, at the age of 40. Marco Barbarigo was born around 1413, and from a young age he displayed a cruel nature, treating those beneath him as little more than servants whose sole purpose was to obey. He demanded absolute submission, and in return offered only the promise of continued employment. This hunger for control only deepened as he grew older, shaping his character and eventually leading him into the embrace of the Templar Order. As the eldest of two sons, Marco was the pride of his family and the recipient of their boundless indulgence. Ships, gold, fine clothing and jewellery, anything he desired was placed at his feet. Such excess only sharpened his greed, encouraging him to take what he wanted regardless of the cost to others. One of the most infamous examples of this was his pursuit of Carlotta Moreau, the wife of his friend and bodyguard, Dante Moreau. Marco's obsession with Carlotta led him to orchestrate a treacherous plot against Dante. Hired killers ambushed Dante, stabbing him 3 times in the torso and once in the head, with the goal to eliminate him. Against all odds, Dante survived the attacks, though not unscathed. The head wound left him with lasting brain damage, stripping him from his independence and higher reasoning. Marco seized upon Dante's weakness. Forcing him to renounce his marriage, Marco claimed Carlotta for himself. Though Carlotta complied outwardly, she never ceased to hope for Dante's recovery. Marco's ties to the Templar Order grew stronger in the years that followed. In 1476, he was entrusted with delivering an important letter bound for Pope Sixtus IV in Rome. The message, passed to him at the Palazzo Ducale, was meant to reach Rodrigo Borgia, but fate intervened when the courier carrying it was intercepted by Giovanni. Giovanni's boldness forced the Templars to act swiftly, and when Rodrigo convened his allies to plot Giovanni's elimination, Marco was among those present at the table. Nearly a decade later, following the death of Doge Giovanni Mocenigo, poisoned under the direction of Carlo Grimaldi, Marco seized the opportunity he had long craved. With the backing of his family and the Templar Order, he was appointed as the new Doge of Venice. Almost immediately, he declared Ezio an enemy of the Republic, blaming him for Mocenigo's death. Yet despite his lofty position, Marco ruled not with presence, but with fear and seclusion. His only true indulgence came during the Carnevale, the city's great festival. Attendance was exclusive and controlled by the possession of a golden mask. What Marco did not anticipate was that Ezio would claim one of these masks for himself. Using the mask as his key, Ezio infiltrated the party, moving through the crowds until he had the Doge in his sights. The end came swiftly. With the concealed firearm hidden within his bracer, Ezio fired a single shot. The bullet struck Marco where he stood, silencing him in front of his startled guests. On February 15th, 1486, Marco's reign as Doge ended, at the age of 73. Silvio Barbarigo was born into the wealth and privilege of the Venetian elite. From his earliest years, however, his world was shaped not by benevolence, but by violence and greed. His father, a man of his own ambitions, was murdered by Silvio's uncle, a ruthless move designed to secure greater control over the family's vast fortune. Robbed of his father, Silvio was forced to live under the roof of the very man who had orchestrated his death. Yet, what was intended as an act of dominance soon backfired. Rather than cowing the young Barbarigo, the experience hardened him. Patient and calculating, Silvio wormed his way through his uncle's trust. One of his earliest displays of cunning came when he uncovered a conspiracy against his uncle, hatched by the rival Soranzo family. Silvio acted decisively. He extended to the Soranzos an invitation to an Easter feast, making his true intent with false hospitality. As their children played in the courtyard below, Silvio raised a toast to his unsuspecting guests. In that moment, archers hidden at key vantage points loosed a storm of arrows into the courtyard, cutting down the Soranzo family where they stood. 10 years later, Silvio enacted a far more personal act of vengeance. Never forgetting the betrayal that had stolen his father's life, he turned on his uncle. Manipulating his mother and sister, he persuaded them to assist in the murder, ensuring the deed was carried out within the very walls of the palazzo. The uncle was slain, and Silvio declared to the household that the old man had died peacefully in his sleep. It was this ruthless ambition that made him a valuable ally to the Templar Order. During their secret councils in Venice, Silvio played an instrumental role, even volunteering to acquire Cantarella, the deadly poison that would later be used in the assassination of the Doge. When Marco fell to Ezio's hidden gun, Silvio responded with force, gathering an army of mercenaries under his command. He sent his sights on l'Arsenal, the great Venetian shipyard. Dante led the charge, seizing control of the area, and attempted to sway local mercenaries to the Templar cause. But Ezio and his ally, Bartolomeo di Alviano, rallied their force in response. The ensuing battle was fierce. Dante, unmatched in strength, clashed with Bartolomeo and seemed on the verge of victory until Ezio intervened. Forced to retreat, Dante fled to the gates with Ezio close behind. From within the chaos, Silvio taunted Ezio, boasting of his family's crimes, mocking the death of Ezio's father and threatening his mother and sister. At last, Silvio and Dante attempted their escape, hurrying to the docks where a ship was meant to carry them to safety. But when they arrived, they found themselves abandoned. Their Templar allies, unwilling to risk their lives, had already set sail for Cyprus, leaving Silvio and Dante stranded. Cornered and out of options, the two men fought to the bitter end. Silvio Barbarigo's arrogance proved his undoing. Ezio struck him down alongside his loyal bodyguard. Even in his final moments, Silvio refused to yield any secrets, choosing to die with his pride intact. It was Dante, not Silvio, who revealed the truth, that the fleeing ship was bound for Cyprus. On July 11th, 1486, at the age of 41, Silvio Barbarigo met his end. Roderick Lansol was born on January 1st, 1431, in the town of Jatvia, within the Kingdom of Valencia, a territory of the Crown of Aragon, in what is now modern-day Spain. He was the son of Joffre Lansol y Escriva and Isabel de Borgia, his mother being a relative of the powerful Borgia family. Though his surname was originally recorded as Lansol in Valencian, his fortunes would change dramatically when his maternal uncle, Alonso de Borgia, ascended to the papacy in 1455 as Pope Calixtus III. From that moment, Roderick abandoned the Lansol name and adopted the Borgia family name, cementing his link to his uncle's rising legacy. As a young man, Rodrigo travelled to Italy to further his education, enrolling at the University of Rome before completing his degree in canon law at Bologna in 1456. The timing of his uncle's elevation to the papal throne opened doors that would have otherwise remained firmly shut. Through Calixtus III's patronage, Rodrigo rose quickly within the ranks of the Catholic Church. In rapid succession, he was granted the positions of bishop, cardinal, and ultimately vice-chancellor of the church, a role he would hold for decades. Nepotism defined the age, and Rodrigo was one of its greatest beneficiaries. His career thrived not through holiness or piety, but through the familial power of the Borgia name. He became deeply entrenched in the workings of the Roman Curia, serving under 5 popes: Calixtus III, Pius II, Paul II, Sixtus IV, and Innocent VIII. In 1458, he was inducted into the Templar Order, drawn to their vision of order and domination. Ambitious and calculating, Rodrigo's rise within the Templars mirrored his climb through the church. By 1476, he had ascended to the rank of Grand Master of the Roman Rite, one of the most powerful branches of the Templars. As Grand Master, Rodrigo was no longer content to simply pull strings in Rome. His ambitions grew bolder. He envisioned the entirety of Italy unified beneath the Templar banner, its cities ruled not by independent leaders, but by loyal puppets. Every assassination, every conspiracy, and every alliance was carefully orchestrated toward that single goal, the domination of Italy. Rodrigo's charisma, political savvy, and ruthless cunning made him a formidable enemy to the assassins, and a dangerous ally to the nobles and merchants who sought his favour. His influence stretched across kingdoms, his schemes intertwined with the fates of Florence, Venice, and beyond. In December of 1476, Rodrigo Borgia orchestrated a ruthless scheme to eliminate Galeazzo Maria Sforza, the powerful Duke of Milan. The Duke had long been a target for the Templars, seen as both as a rival and an obstacle to their growing influence in Italy. Rodrigo carefully recruited and manipulated 3 Milanese nobles, Giovanni Andrea Lampugnani, Carlo Visconti, and Gerolamo Olgiati, each driven by ambition or resentment, and together they plotted to strike during the feast of Santo Stefano, when Galeazzo would appear publicly and be most vulnerable. On one night in Florence, as Rodrigo was preparing to leave the city with an escort of guards, he was intercepted by Giovanni Auditore. Rodrigo, never one to fight battles directly, immediately fled into the shadows, while Giovanni fought through his men. Concealed nearby, Rodrigo watched as Giovanni captured one of his guards and forced from him a confession: the Templars planned to assassinate Galeazzo Sforza. This revelation gave Giovanni the chance to intervene. Despite his desperate efforts, Giovanni arrived too late. The Duke of Milan was slain inside the church of Santo Stefano, and Rodrigo's plot had succeeded, sowing further chaos in the fragile balance of Italian politics. From there, Rodrigo's ambition shifted towards Venice. Giovanni, still in pursuit, discovered a Venetian ducat in the possession of Giovanni Lampugnani, tying the conspiracy to the powerful Barbarigo family. Following this lead, he uncovered an intercepted message sent from Marco and Silvio Barbarigo to their master Rodrigo. Determined to expose the Templar schemes, Giovanni carried a copied version of the letter to Rome, tasked by Lorenzo de' Medici and Uberto Alberti with discovering its true recipient. In Rome, Giovanni trailed the letter as it passed from hand to hand until finally reaching its destination: Rodrigo Borgia himself. The Templar wasted no time, hurrying into the Vatican to present it to Pope Sixtus IV. By manipulating the letter's contents, Rodrigo convinced the Pope to consider military support for the Templars' designs on Florence, further entrenching his influence within both political and spiritual spheres. Emerging from the Vatican, Rodrigo believed his plan was secure, unaware at first that Giovanni still followed him through the streets of Rome. The chase ended in St. Peter's Basilica, where Rodrigo had laid a trap. The assassin walked into the ambush, surrounded by Rodrigo's guards. Watching the slaughter of his guards, Rodrigo hurled a dagger that struck Giovanni in the chest before fleeing. Though wounded, the assassin survived, but Rodrigo had already moved to the next step of his scheme. Realising Giovanni posed too much of a great threat to their ambitions, Rodrigo conspired with Uberto Alberti and the Pazzi family to frame him for treason. The plan was carefully executed. Giovanni and his sons, Federico and Patricio, were arrested and imprisoned in the Palazzo della Signoria, accused of plotting against Florence itself. Rodrigo stayed the night at Uberto's house, where by chance Ezio arrived with documents that could have proven his father's innocence. Ezio briefly noticed Rodrigo in the background, but unaware of his identity or importance, dismissed him and declined Alberti's invitation to remain for the night. The following morning, Rodrigo attended the trial and execution of Giovanni and his sons. Standing amidst the crowd, Ezio arrived just in time to witness the public hanging of his father and brothers. Rodrigo, cloaked in satisfaction, spotted the boy in the crowd and raised the alarm. At once, Alberti called for Ezio's arrest, but the young noble escaped. By 1478, Rodrigo Borgia's schemes intensified in Florence. Determined to remove the Medici brothers, Lorenzo the Magnificent, and his younger sibling Giuliano, Rodrigo threw his full weight behind the Pazzi family, who despised Medici dominance. Travelling to San Gimignano, Rodrigo met with Francesco, Jacapo, and Vieri de Pazzi, where together they set the foundation of a plot that would shake the city to its core. Sensing danger, however, Rodrigo slipped away just before Mario Auditore and his nephew Ezio stormed the town with mercenaries. Not long after, Rodrigo reconvened with his conspirators. Beneath the Basilica of Santa Maria Novella, in the shadowed catacombs, the conspirators pledged themselves to the assassination. Rodrigo urged caution, warning them of assassin interference, but his parting words brimmed with confidence. Tomorrow would mark a new dawn for Florence. When the plot ended in disaster, Giuliano slain but Lorenzo surviving, Rodrigo's wrath fell swiftly. Meeting Jacopo and Emilio in San Gimignano, he turned on Jacopo, executing him with cold efficiency. With Florence stabilised under Medici rule, Rodrigo turned his attention north to Venice. In 1485 he met with Carlo Grimaldi and the Barbarigo family, orchestrating the murder of the Doge Giovanni Mocenigo so that his Templar allies could seize control of the city. Once the plan was set, Rodrigo withdrew to Rome, leaving his lieutenants to carry out the deed. By 1486, Rodrigo's gaze extended beyond Italy. Word reached him that a fellow Templar, Ottoman Prince Sem, had discovered a piece of Eden, the apple, and hidden it in Cyprus. Rodrigo dispatched an armed host to retrieve it, and 2 years later the artifact was carried back to Venice. Rodrigo prepared to claim his prize, but Ezio had already intercepted the courier, taking his place. The assassin confronted Rodrigo face to face. However, Rodrigo declared himself the prophet destined to open the fabled vault. When Ezio proved too formidable, Rodrigo summoned an elite guard to overwhelm him, slipping away in the chaos. Later that same year, Rodrigo turned to Forli, tasking the Templar lord Girolamo Riario with compiling a map that charted the scattered pages of Altair's codex. Such knowledge would lead directly to the vault, but Riario's schemes ended abruptly when his wife Caterina Sforza betrayed him, hiring the Orsi brothers to orchestrate his death. Unaware of Caterina's hand in the affair, Rodrigo hired the Orsi himself, demanding they recover the map and, if possible, the apple. The brothers laid siege to Forli, but their campaign collapsed when Ezio defeated them, securing both the map and the apple. Yet fortune did not favour the assassins for long. The apple slipped from Ezio's grasp, falling into the possession of Girolamo Savonarola, a zealot who would rise as another enemy of Rodrigo and the Brotherhood alike. By 1491, Rodrigo's reach stretched into Spain, manipulating Tomás de Torquemada, the feared Inquisitor General and secret Templar of the Spanish Rite. Rodrigo directed purges against the assassins. Torquemada, convinced of Rodrigo's piety, obeyed his every order with unflinching zeal, never realising he was merely a pawn in the Grand Master's designs. During this same period, Rodrigo's intelligence network uncovered the ambitions of Christopher Columbus, who sought royal backing to sail west across the Atlantic. Already aware of the hidden lands beyond the ocean and the ancient treasures they harboured, Rodrigo resolved to stop him before discovery threatened Templar plans. He arranged a meeting with Columbus in Venice, laying a trap, but suspicion gnawed at Columbus's friend, Luis de Santangel, an assassin who called upon Ezio for aid. The assassin arrived in time to foil Rodrigo's plot, rescuing Columbus and ensuring that the explorer's voyage would proceed unhindered. Following the death of Pope Innocent VIII, Rodrigo Borgia moved with ruthless calculation. In the conclave of August 1492, he is said to have bribed the votes of the cardinals with gold, favours and promises of land, securing his election as Pope Alexander VI. To the world, he was now the head of the Catholic Church, but beneath the papal tiara, Rodrigo's true ambition lay elsewhere, the vault hidden beneath the Vatican, which he believed to be the dwelling place of God himself. By 1494, the death of Lorenzo de' Medici and the weakness of his son Piero created turmoil in Florence. Into this chaos stepped Savonarola, empowered by the very apple of Eden Rodrigo had once lost. Rodrigo dispatched agents and soldiers again and again to wrest the artifact from Florence, but each mission ended in failure. In 1498, Ezio slew Savonarola, shattering his hold over the city. On the 28th of December 1499, Ezio pursued Rodrigo into the Vatican itself. The assassin infiltrated the Sistine Chapel during High Mass and struck at the Pope from above. To his astonishment, Rodrigo rose unharmed, grasping the papal staff, another piece of Eden, and unleashed its devastating power. Members of the clergy were struck down by waves of force, yet Ezio endured, revealing that he too carried a relic of the first civilization. The battle that followed was unlike any other. With the apple, Ezio summoned spectral doubles of himself, overwhelming Rodrigo in combat, but the Pope, fueled by his staff, held Ezio aside and seized the apple. Combining the two artifacts, Rodrigo opened the passage to the vault. Wounded but unbroken, Ezio rose again and followed Rodrigo into the vault. There he found the Pope raging in frustration, pounding upon the sealed doors, which refused to admit him. Ezio descended into the chamber and challenged Rodrigo to abandon relics, guards, and subterfuge, to fight him man to man. In the brutal struggle that followed, Ezio bested him. Broken and disbelieving, Rodrigo confessed the truth. He had never been a man of faith, nor did he believe in God. He had donned the robes of the papacy for one reason only: to claim the staff and the vault, to stand as prophet of a new world. Ezio denied him this, telling him that he was no prophet, had never been, and never would be. The words struck Rodrigo harder than any blade. Defeated in body and spirit, he begged Ezio to kill him. But Ezio refused. He declared that no death could restore his murdered kin, and that leaving Rodrigo alive with the knowledge of his failure was punishment enough. To be denied both faith and destiny, to live as nothing but a broken fraud, That was a fate far crueler than death. Rodrigo's fall was swift thereafter. His son Cesare, consumed with his own ambition, launched a siege on Monteregione without his father's approval, seeking the apple and the extermination of the assassins. From then on, Rodrigo was reduced to a mere figurehead, stripped of authority, while Cesare Borgia took control of Rome and the Templar cause. Following the debacle beneath the Vatican, misfortune seemed to stalk Rodrigo's every step. In June of 1500, an iron steeple from St. Peter's Basilica came crashing down, striking the earth mere feet from where he walked. The very next day, a chamber of the Vatican collapsed, killing all inside, except for Rodrigo, spared by a canopy that caught the falling stones above him. Weeks later, fever racked his body, and before the year was out, he was nearly gored to death by a stag on a hunting excursion. In 1503, Rodrigo sought to reclaim control through other means. He entrusted the Apple of Eden to his grandson, Giovanni, the illegitimate child of Lucrezia, hoping that the boy might succeed where his elders had failed. However, Cesare remained the greater threat. By August of that year, Rodrigo's patience had reached its end. At the notorious party hosted by his nephew, Rodrigo reprimanded Cesare, only to be dismissed with scorn. Cesare reminded him that it was he, not the Pope, who commanded armies and men. This arrogance, combined with his reckless ambition, convinced Rodrigo that his son had to be stopped. Rodrigo stole from Lucrezia's private stores of Cantarella a deadly poison and laced a selection of apples with the substance. His intent was simple, to remove Cesare quietly, but fate as ever betrayed him. In his private chambers, Rodrigo received Cesare, who demanded to know what had become of his funds and his army. The Pope stalled at first, but then revealed that his allies had been slain by the assassins. Soon after, Lucrezia burst into the chambers as she had discovered her poison supply missing and feared what her father intended. Her warning came too late though. Cesare had already bitten into one of the apples, spitting it out onto the floor. Enraged beyond measure, he seized his father, forcing the poisoned fruit into his throat. The Pope clawed at his son, but the poison did its work swiftly. Rodrigo Borgia, Pope Alexander VI, Grand Master of the Templars, died choking on his own ambition on the 18th of August 1503 at the age of 72. Ezio arrived moments after the act. Finding that his enemy was already defeated, he knelt beside him and gave him his last rites, a mercy Rodrigo had never offered his own countless victims. So with that, there is the backstory, life and lore related to every main Templar target in Assassin's Creed 2. I really hope you enjoyed the video, have a great rest of your week and thank you for watching.